Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the live audience and also welcome to our live stream to Relevant Response series. This is the second one, Mapping Necessities tonight. This program series is inspired by the response, the quite overwhelming and immediate response that we had during the war that we are experiencing now, that we see in Ukraine. And we kind of wanted to question our solidarity. What is it based upon? Especially in Amsterdam. We are reflecting on the culture and art sector in Amsterdam. And there was quite a response here in the city, of course, as well. And this was a conversation that was ongoing in Amsterdam Museum. And they thought, we want to make a series. And we're better than Pakhuis de Zwijger. So that's... It's a creation of Pakhuis de Zwijger, Amsterdam Museum, and also myself. I'm a co-creator, and I will also be moderating this evening. My name is Sahar Shirzad. But before we go on, I want to give the floor to Karen Amat-Mukrim. She will read a piece that she wrote for the NRC. She's a writer, novelist, and a regular columnist for various newspapers such as NRC. And I don't want to say much about it because we will talk about it afterwards. Can I have a little round of applause for Karen Amat-Mukrim?
Dank je. Identiteiten zijn bindende leugens, stelde de filosoof Kwame Anthony Appiah al eens. Het zijn verhalen die wij elkaar vertellen om te kunnen geloven dat we bij elkaar horen. Een nationale identiteit, en ik parafraseer Appiah hier, is noodzakelijk om ons een gevoel van eenheid te geven. De herkenning van onszelf in de ander helpt bovendien om ons minder eenzaam te voelen, want verbonden met anderen. Appiah wees er terecht op dat het idee van een nationale identiteit, hoe nuttig ook, gevaarlijk kan zijn. Het staat immers in de weg van een meer universeel menselijke solidariteit. Ik denk de laatste paar weken veel na over solidariteit en dan vooral over de vele nuances die daarin bestaan en hoe die botsen met het feitelijke uitgangspunt van solidariteit, namelijk dat we ons zonder voorbehoud zouden moeten bekommeren om de mensen in ons midden. En ik vraag me af, als het waar is wat Appiah stelt, dat identiteiten bestaan uit bindende leugens, hoe we onszelf voorliegen als het gaat over onze houding ten aanzien van vluchtelingen. De oorlog in Oekraïne heeft Europa verenigd, heet het inmiddels in de kranten. Net als onze buurlanden lieten ook wij in Nederland zonder morren en volkomen eensgezind weten dat vluchtelingen welkom zijn. Oekraïense studenten worden geholpen hier hun studie voort te zetten. Op treinstations worden lege kinderwagens neergezet voor de allerkleinste vluchtelingetjes en de koning stelt zelfs een van zijn landgoederen beschikbaar. Iedereen is solidair met Oekraïne en wie dat niet is, is een onmens. Opeens, na jaren van wat de vluchtelingencrisis is gaan heten, lijkt het vanzelfsprekend dat we solidair zijn met mensen in nood. Ik ben voor het eerst sinds lange tijd opgetogen en trots om Nederlands te zijn. En op hetzelfde moment krab ik me achter een oor. Heb ik soms iets gemist? Hoe kan het dat we nu knuffels en verrassingseieren aan gevluchte kinderen uitdelen, terwijl we in het tentenkamp van Moria andere kinderen tegenhouden? Kinderen die uit andere oorlogen minstens zo vernietigend zijn gevlucht en die soms jarenlang onder de meest erbarmelijke omstandigheden leven. Zozeer dat sommigen van hen zelfmoord proberen te plegen, want de dood lijkt milder dan hun bestaan aan de voet van die onneembare vesting die Europa heet. Hoe komt het dat al die andere vluchtelingen worden verdacht gemaakt, gewantrouwd, zelfs gehaat? Zijn hun oorlogen minder vernietigend? Is hun hongersnood niet acuut, hun levens ons minder waard? Het is de herkenbaarheid, zeggen sommigen. Mensen hebben gevoelens die ze niet altijd zouden hoeven verdedigen en je kan nu eenmaal niet met iedereen solidair zijn. Het is een intuïtieve beslissing, zeggen ze. Om de deur voor de een dicht te houden en voor de ander een pan soep op te zetten en het logeerbed op te maken. En waar het dan op neerkomt, is dat het makkelijker is om ons in de ander te verplaatsen wanneer die ander op ons lijkt. Dat is niet iets om je voor te schamen, zeggen we. Het is de menselijke aard. Dat het op zichzelf moreel verwerpelijk is om alleen of vooral mee te leven met de mensen die op ons lijken, lijkt me vanzelfsprekend. Maar wat dat idee van herkenbaarheid, van identiteit, zo je wilt, in onze tijd en in ons land een nog stekeliger kwestie maakt, is dat al die andere vluchtelingen soms wel degelijk op andere Nederlanders lijken. Op bruine en zwarte Nederlanders, die even goed van dit land en van deze plek zijn. De herkenbaarheid als reden om solidair te zijn met alleen witte vluchtelingen is, Appia indachtig, niet meer dan een verhaal dat we onszelf hebben verteld. Het is een verhaal over wie de Nederlander is, hoe hij eruit ziet en in welke God hij gelooft. Het is een verzameling leugens die ons bindt en die anderen buiten de deur houdt.
Thank you so much, Karen, for your very profound piece that you wrote.
You're welcome, thank you.
Before we continue to our conversation, I forgot to say the audience has a role today as well. In this series, we really welcome to be interactive from the start. So if you have any questions or any remarks from the beginning until the end, you're allowed to raise your hand up. There will be a mic that will come to you because we have a live stream. And also your piece was, of course, in Dutch, but we have this program in English. The live stream had a subtitle, but I don't know who in the audience maybe doesn't speak Dutch, but you can look it back for the translation. There's a subtitle. Of course, I think you're quite curious what just was said. Yeah, Karen.
Yeah.
This is, as I said, a second edition. This series started because, as I said, there was an immediate and overwhelming response that you touch upon as well in your article about that it is beautiful to see this solidarity. It also gave you sort of a hope, as you wrote, but it is also, of course, painful because it questions what we base our solidarity upon. What's the fundament of our solidarity? Because all of a sudden, proximity seemed to be of value, that the fact that it was close to us, or the fact that we had self-recognition in Ukrainian. So all these elements all of a sudden were dismantled and questioned. And the last time we talked about, because it's about the art and culture sector, is that the culture is supposed to perhaps move slower than trends. So the trend goes fast and we have this immediate response. And maybe in settings like this, and also in making and creating and art, in writing, we have to really slow down and feel how we can have a better impact than just something hollow, like putting out a flag, we said the last time. So it's maybe good to also have a summary that was also a summary of the first episode. And now my question to you, because Appia proposes that identities are lies that bind us, right?
Yeah.
And it's stories that we tell each other in order to believe that we belong to one another. Therefore, the idea of nationality and identity can also become dangerous, perhaps. And how can, in spaces of art and culture, in your opinion, assist in creating counter-narratives when we tell this single story about identity, such as what the Dutch identity must be?
Well, first of all, I think it's not. I think it's very important to understand the necessity of an identity, of a national identity. I think it's very normal for white people to relate to white refugees more than black or brown refugees. I mean, that's not something that I push back against because it feels very natural. But what I'm proposing actually is that
does it feel natural to them or to you? Or?
That's the whole thing. We as a country, as a society, it's not all white anymore. So it's very important to understand that this binding with other refugees comes from within us, within our community. If you would see the Dutch as a community,
as a collective.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So that's one way to look at it. To just respond to the other stories as well, just with the same heart.
Yeah, and how. You write. That's the way you create, and we are also here tonight, and this discussion that we're having together with museums, with storytelling centers, with any documentary makers, any kind of art or creating writers. How can we utilize this space that we have in order to have these counter stories, in order to this identity that you said, this collective of what it means to be Dutch or from here, to broaden that so that it so that it's not those lies as you talked about that we
I
tell
think
ourselves.
it's quite simple, just to take the space that is offered. So if you're a maker, whatever you make, just take the space that is offered to you, because we're lucky enough to live in a country where there's relatively a lot of space to make your art, to tell your story. Just take the space and tell your story without trying to think too much about how the rest of the community, of how the rest of society will look or listen to your story. You know, it sounds very simple, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Because if you grow up in a white society, you're often taught that your story and your narrative is not that precious. So it's not that easy as I tell it, but that's very important to just take that space and tell your story and show the way. And that's because if the story is told, it's already there, and then it'll be part of the broader spectrum of stories that are told. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
So when I write a book
Yeah.
about my heritage,
Yeah.
and it's in Dutch and it's in the Dutch,
Because you did.
yeah, I write a lot of books,
Yeah.
and they're in the Dutch bookstores.
Yeah.
That makes my story part of the Dutch narrative.
Yeah, such as hidden stories,
It's very
as
easy,
as you wrote, to also create a more inclusive image of what we think our story is. And there's also something interesting. And you said in your piece in Dutch, you said andere vluchtelingen, other refugees, and then you have Ukrainians. And well, you wrote your piece, I think, more than a month ago, or maybe 2 months ago. And now a lot of things have evolved. And interestingly, now you see in pieces that they say now you have the regular refugees and the Ukrainian refugees, even in the language of policy making and all the articles that are written, that even municipalities say we don't have any space anymore for regular refugees because we already made space for Ukrainian refugees. I personally think that's a very dangerous thing that's happening in language, because what are you basically saying with regular refugees? You're saying brown refugees are refugees that are not from here.
And it's also very
So
dangerous in a sense that who are we?
Yeah.
It's like, so the Dutch, this country doesn't have space for normal refugees, but we are the Dutch as well. We do want to make space for other refugees.
Yeah.
So I'm writing a book right now that's kind of touching upon this idea of the other within us. So we, the collective we, it's the other that's in the middle of it. People like you and me and so many millions of other people with roots outside of Europe.
Yeah.
This whole idea of us being this normal white person, that's an old, and it's very dated, and it's not there anymore. So I'm so sorry to bring it to a lot of people, but that's the reality of it.
That's the reality of
it.
Thank you. And I also would like to invite a very special person, because as you said, you write a lot of books and also a lot of research. You wrote a series for the Correspondent called Hidden History, I think. Yeah. In English, I'm now translating your work. I know that's very sensitive if you're a writer, but it's Hidden History. And Lisette Maneza, if you want to come forward, who is a poet, she made also a theater performance, inspired by the stories that you wrote. So can I have a round of applause for Lisette? Can you tell us, Lisette, how the work of Karin inspired you to create this? I don't know if I should say theater performance. I think it's several things. It's music, it's performance, it's a lot of things. We of course just talked about how important stories are that we tell ourselves about our identities, and I think one of the things you do in your stories is also go back to your background and what your origin says and your story says, and where you are here now says about you, and the fact that you also originate from a post-conflict place, and how history, telling the true history, is so important. How did you get inspired by Karin? And I think it's the first time you guys are having this conversation since you've been inspired by your work and made this. So
yeah, that's
can you
true.
tell a little bit more?
So it went like this. I got the question that came from Karin and het Zuidelijk Toneel, and they were seeking for a person to translate a lot of essays and research and writings by you into something on stage. So I first started reading it, and I first did my own research in the research that was already done. And I started with writing, with trying to write from the intention that you had when you were writing, I thought that the intentions were to collect these stories to show that this is also part of our history, and
You mean the Dutch history?
yeah,
Yeah.
and to seek for stories that were not in our history books but that belonged there. So it was more a seek of like, how do I tell this collective story with you, that you transmitted to me, something like that. And then at some point, there was the director, that Ira Kip, and she read what I was writing, and she was like, this is nice, but we want it to be more personal. What does hidden history mean to you?
Exactly.
And then I got back to the essays and to the writings that touched me in a personal way. For example, the one about Namibia, about the that the Second World War wasn't the first Holocaust caused by Germany. And I remember a few lines that were very poetic, actually, in the essay, about how the sand got over the footsteps and over the bodies of people in Namibia who went through the genocide. And then it clashed with my own history and with my own personal history of the Rwandan genocide that I haven't seen or witnessed or anything like that, but that happened just right before I was born. And I wanted to write something knowing that I wasn't there, but also knowing that somehow these generational stories of the people that came before us are with us and
It
travel with
affects
us.
you. You carry it within you.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why, because the Zuidelijk Toneel, they approached me asking if I would want to write a play based on my essays, and then I said, you know what I'm very interested in. The thing is, I saw her perform a year before, and I was very very impressed by her
Thank you.
talent. And I said, what I'm interested in is, I research history for this collection of essays, but what I'm interested in is the new generation, the way they make up Europe the way it is right now. I mean, I am like this old school immigrant from Suriname, just a very post-colonial story. Everyone knows all about that. I'm very interested in this new Europe that is being formed at this moment.
Yeah.
So, and I think she did an amazing job.
Yeah, because that was also my question to you was when writing hidden history, or also an article about these stories, whether it was your intention that this would derive from it, because it's beautiful that it happened organically almost. But did you just answered it, that you did it also intentionally to have, because I see this as cultural heritage, that we are actually also creating new forms of cultural heritage where these stories also belong, in order as to go back to that philosopher, that we tell stories in order to belong to one another. Yeah. If these stories are never there, not part of our culture or heritage, how can we then belong to one another? So I think it's beautiful what happened here. And I have a question for you, Lisette, because I can often get frustrated as someone who I'm from Afghanistan, so the war is actually now currently also happening, unfortunately, in my country of origin. And I move in the art and culture sector, and I can get frustrated now with the double standards, of course, that is happening, but also with assumptions, or also the lack of knowledge. And I'm a programmer myself, so I have this role as someone who also creates and is part of the art and culture sector. But on the other hand, I'm also someone who's from this conflict area and seeing these double standards happen in the sector that I'm working in. And this lack of knowledge on where to begin to recognize what, because today is about mapping necessities, what the necessity is of people affected by war within the art and culture sector. Where do you even begin? And then sometimes there are assumptions of the things that we would need. Do you recognize that? Where do you have any thoughts on that? Because I think, of course, it also stood out to you of what is happening currently with the double standards. As someone, as I think we maybe share the same space that we're trying to create in this sector. How do you move around in these observations?
It's a bit of a complicated question.
Yeah.
But if I look at myself and the way I, because you said before, take the space that is offered to you and tell your own story. So what I try to do, or what I've realized at some point, was okay, I want to be an artist, I want to tell stories, I want to be a poet, etc. And then I had the choice to talk about anything and to write about anything. And when I was a bit younger, I would base it on my emotions without explaining where they come from or researching that or going deeper into it. But at some point, I realized that these emotions, or something that I would write about, could be a translation of something that other people are also experiencing, something like that. And then I made the choice. Do I want to write about my heartbreak when I have a heartbreak, or the love of my life when I'm feeling in love? Or do I want to write about what I've experienced in the household and the stories my parents tell me, or stuff like that? And then that's how I try to take the space that is offered to me, or that I can enter into, etc. To give these stories a right to exist, something like that, when I can.
Thank you. That's and as I said, we're of course here with several perspectives and also institutions and organizations and museums that can maybe create that space, maybe so-called safe space, in order for these stories also to coexist, the stories that make you human, that we all have in common, but also the stories that give you that extra dimension because you are connected to this origin where conflict and war happen, and we carry that cultural heritage with us as well. How do you think, Karen, we can shift a sort of mindset in the art and culture sector, also for that Dutch identity that we talked about? Do you have any concrete advice that you can give, seeing that that museums and Amsterdam is now?
I think a sense of reality, understanding that the public is totally different now than it was 15 years ago. So the stories that are being told, that you give space to as an institution, should be relevant. So they should touch upon, for instance, themes like migration. I think migration and identity are the most important themes of our day and age. And it's not because we are migrants only, but also because the European societies are infected by us. Infected and affected and everything, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, we're intertwined.
Yeah, and so migration for the native Dutch people and identity is the most important subject at this moment. So when you program your institution, you have to be realistic about who your public is. If you're not realistic and not really truly understanding the reality of society at this point, you will lose your audience.
Yeah.
Because there are less and less and less people who do not think about identity at this point, because we can't afford to ignore this whole theme anymore.
No, it is a theme for longer now, and it's interesting that you said migration and also the topic refugee specifically, because that's also mostly the status of people that are connected also to war and conflict, as we are talking about today, and we act every time as if it's a crisis, and we talked about that last time as well. Refugee crisis or migration crisis. Well, as long as humanity existed, migration and refugees have existed. So how come every time it seems like a crisis? How come it's not a continuum in our And I know we don't have all the answers here at the table, but I just want to trigger your thoughts.
Because it's
why
not
do
nice.
we don't have the flexibility of, or if we say just like 20% of our organization is going to be based upon this part of society, we're going to keep that space in our organization for these stories, this cultural heritage, because it's a continuum. It's not a crisis. It's happening.
Yeah, well, I think people don't want to think about it because war is not nice. So we like to think about peace all the time, and then we
overwhelmed
shocked
every time.
Yeah. And also when I say that people have to be realistic about migration and identity, et cetera, doesn't mean that you have to program this very literally. It also means that you have to look at the subject with a different different eyes. You know, for example, if you talk about the Second World War, what is the relation, for instance, between Morocco and Europe? What did Morocco do to help the refugees? Stuff like that. You know, look with different glasses to the history and try to connect the dots between all the different types of Dutch people that we have at this moment. I think one of my essays on the correspondent was about Black soldiers in World War II, and it was one of the most shared essays on the correspondent ever.
Maybe because it was new information.
Yes, and also because it's not an angry. I'm not angry. I'm just stating the facts, and it's also very hopeful to see that we've been connected with each other for ages already. And so I think it's a very beautiful thought, a beautiful insight.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And do you think that also? And do you want to react? If you want to react on that, Lisette, you're free to do so.
I'm agreeing. I also. You said something about New Europe before, that you're interested in this new Europe, this new generation. And I actually did a research through Europe in the last summer for a few months, where I followed the book Afropean of Johnny Pitts, maybe you know it, where he's just seeking for the African diaspora within Europe. And in his book, and also during my travels, he went as a journalist, and me, I went as a poet. It's a bit different, but what I did find, and what I'm also hearing in what you're saying, is how these continents and how these stories, how they have been connected for years and years and years and years, and how European history is also my history in a way.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, that you're allowed to take ownership of this space that you're physically are a part of. Yeah. Giving a reminder to the audience that you're a part of the program. So if you have any questions or remarks regarding this conversation that we're having, yeah. Oh, there's a hand right there. Is there a mic that can... there we go.
Yes, maybe briefly...
Maybe, is it on?
If it's on.
Yeah, it's
yes.
on. Yeah.
In response to what Lisette is saying right now, I think at FOAM there was an exhibition on Johnny Pitt's European. Could you maybe reflect or sort of explore what it would be like for you to present that research you did in a museum such as FOAM, and what that would do for presenting the story?
That's a good question.
So what I did with it, because in the FOAM the exhibition was it were photos, because he's a journalist, he writes, but he also takes photographs. But I went as a poet, so what I created from it was poetry, actually. And I think it's just a combination of meeting people and the people that I met and what I felt in that moment, and a lot of feelings and a lot of small moments of kind of feeling at home. I think that's what came out of the research, and yeah, the seek to feel at home in history, in a continent, in different places, and then finding that in the weirdest small things, something like that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And as we talked about space, and that there is a necessity for these stories to be told, and these stories are obviously there in the form of your artwork, for example. Can you name elements that would make you feel welcome and safe enough in institutions and organizations that you also belong in this space in order to share that history that's actually more of a collective and common history now that as we are discussing it, instead of it all being so separate. So are there elements in organizations that contribute to that feeling for you to be able to make and flourish? Maybe a difficult question because
Yeah, but I'm thinking about some, but I don't know. I think what I've struggled with is a bit of being invited for a specific program and for specific topics, which sometimes is totally fine, but other times I feel resistance or something like that,
Mhm.
and I feel that I would like to choose my own topics,
Mhm.
or I would like to title it myself, something like that.
As any artist would.
yeah, you
Yeah.
don't want to become one-dimensional,
No.
and you don't want to. You are not your identity. You are what you do is your expertise. So of course you don't want to be perceived as such in your work. I wrote a piece about the double standards because I studied law and I was talking about the judicial effects of what it has for several refugees, and I was also introduced through that article. I'm not going to name the platform as ex-refugee Sahar Shirzad. Those moments are super painful, and then having to explain why that is not appropriate. So of course we are moving still in these spaces where I'm feeling, and maybe you can add to this, there's this emancipation also with people with a refugee and migrant background that is quite new in the Netherlands, I'm feeling. Because I'm explaining myself. Why am I'm trying to understand why am I explaining myself, and why don't we know that this title, for example, as ex-refugee, or that your identity matters in this, or that you have regular refugees and Ukrainians, and there's this dehumanization happening. Why is this? Is this new? Is there an emancipation happening on these topics? Do you think, Karen?
I don't know. On the subject of refugees, I think it's been a political movement for decades now to dehumanize refugees, and I think we're starting to get to a kickoff from that. You know, is that a word? Just to kick off,
Yeah,
as if it's
kickstart.
no,
Yeah,
it's not
or
like
not kick
as
off.
if it were a drug, and now we have to kick off.
Oh,
Get
yeah,
from-
yeah.
I have that feeling that people
Yeah.
just now are starting to understand the way we were brainwashed for decades on our thinking about refugees. But that's just a hunch. I don't know. if
But do you
that's
feel
true.
like the kickoff or the
Yes.
rehabilitation,
Yeah.
I don't know, is happening?
I feel so. Yeah, I feel
Yeah?
like that is
Okay.
actually happening right now. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
because
I'm an optimist.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
we need that. Yeah.
I can't write if I'm not optimistic.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, and even when you're angry, you can also channel. I think in your writing, you're very good at channeling that and then giving words to it.
Yeah, the thing what I do is
Yeah.
usually I lure my readers into my opinion. So afterwards
you're
they're
a
like,
good
"Oh my
writer."
God, I've
Yeah.
never looked at it like that. She might be right." I'm like, "Yeah, bitch,
Yeah.
I am."
Yeah. Yeah. Last question for there. See, audience always it takes a little while and then it comes to life. Yeah.
Maybe I have an answer for you.
Yeah.
Maybe if the institutions will actually hire refugees to come
Yeah.
up with themes that explains and research what they are going through and handle them power positions in the institutes, maybe that will change the conversation and change the dynamic and will actually emancipate refugees.
Yeah.
Instead of handing out themes that are already planned and researched and budgeted and maybe if someone invites you to do a research of something that you want to do, that you think could help your people, that will actually change the power game that we are
Do I
in.
understand correctly that what you're saying is you want to put someone in a position of empowerment instead of maybe framing them in one topic or the other?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Also,
thank you.
refugees need jobs, so it would be amazing
That's very
if
good.
they could like
Yeah.
get money to
Yeah.
do what they studied for.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting what you're saying because having observed what is happening in law right now is that there's this exemption that is created for Ukrainians. It's the first time ever in Europe that this 3-year exemption is created. Well, it was there on paper, but they enforced it. That they are allowed to work, education, basically move and live like us, like Europeans, like Dutch citizens. And as they say, the regular refugees, so the refugees that are not from Ukraine, are still in the Netherlands, as opposed to Germany, for example. You're allowed to work when you're in your asylum procedure. In the Netherlands, you're not allowed to work, and you're not allowed to go to school when you're in your asylum procedure. And these asylum procedures in the E&Ds are also getting overwhelmed because of the Ukrainians coming in. So the waiting lists are also getting longer, as the waiting time of the refugees that are not from Ukraine are getting longer, and also the period where your life is literally in on hold. I heard a quote about a refugee being interviewed in a refugee camp, where he said, being in prison is easier than being a refugee because at least you know when you get out. And we just don't know when it stops. So then it's so eminent and so important also for us, when we have the luxury and freedom here, also in the art and culture sector, to take a stand and say, you know, I don't care about the law. We will create space where you can come here, you can create, you can work, and don't have to keep your life on hold for those people who don't get that exemption. And having this very different treatment. I'm sorry, I think I'm in a monologue situation over here while I have to lead the conversation. But you really triggered me in what you said, so thank you for your add to this conversation. Yes.
Yes, I have a question. This session is called Mapping Necessities.
Yeah.
And I want to ask the people who are sitting in front of me, why do we have difficulties to work in line with the media? Because we have a writer, we have a poet here, but how can we change the vision of people with media and with writing? Because I feel me as me who has a migrant background, that a lot of people here in the Netherlands don't understand that we have to explain the double standards. And I'm also working in the social cultural organization here in Amsterdam. So I'm asking you guys for how can we change. Is it also a necessity for cultural organization to work with media? And why are we not working more together? And how can we change that?
I feel like media and cultural institutions do work together, sort of. Right? I mean, whenever you have an exposition or a play, or the newspapers will, spend some attention.
I feel like that there's only a select group of people who will read that. I don't feel like it's
true.
It's upon the mass of the Netherlands, for example.
It's
So
true.
I feel if we change those perspectives,
You feel like it's too slow. The change.
it feels too slow, and also in this leftish bubble that we all live in, that only read those articles, they only read your books, your poetry.
Yeah.
So I feel, how can we get it broader? And I think that's also a necessity for arts and cultural institutions here in Amsterdam to get it abroad beyond our Amsterdam leftish bubble.
Yeah. This I don't know. So because I'm a writer, I don't talk to anyone. I just sit in my house and I write my books.
That is
So I'll just give it to you.
just only these moments you're out of the
Yeah,
house.
like, oh my God, so many people.
Yeah,
Wow.
but it's a good point that you're making, Hamid. So thank you for your addition, and I think it's good because we have a third edition program. This will continue to take that with us, and how can we make that even broader? Last question. For this
Yes,
part.
well, my name is Rob. I'm working for a theater in the city center of Amsterdam. And we've actually employed both for program making as for regular jobs a lot of refugees, ex-refugees, people with an LGBTIQ background that have arrived here over the years. And across from our place, there is a former hotel which is now being used by so-called status houders, temporarily apparently, but the temporarily has been expanded. I've contacted that organization as well. And as this is Mapping Necessities, I put the question forward to that organization. We have a theater. We have programs in many languages. We are open for new initiatives, and also people that recently arrived here could perhaps, if they were engaged in the arts in their former country, do something similar with us. So far, I have not had a response on it. They were very enthusiastic.
Okay,
but
so what
yeah.
you're saying here is that you made attempts to reach out and connect in order to
Exactly.
create that space that we are
Yeah.
continuously talking
Yeah.
about now. So there's also we can have, as I said, maybe 10 or 20% of that space in our organizations, and then open the doors and be like, hey, we did what we had to do.
Yeah.
And then it's not like rainbows and butterflies.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of challenges in, okay, where do you start? Because there's also a sensitivity in, it's not like I'm also being called often like, hey, do you have refugees for me for conversations? Or it's not like you have a number where you can find refugees, or it's also a sensitive topic in how do you connect. So I think that's a very relevant point that you're making, maybe for us to take into our panel discussion after this, is also these are sensitive relationships that you are building in this city, and how do you create a sustainable relationship where you have a sustainable impact for these people. Yeah.
But we are open for newcomers to provide them a space.
Yeah.
And I very much hope to get from this evening some points on actually, indeed, what do you need? What can we do to provide for you so that you can continue the work that you used to do in your new home now?
Yeah, also a very good point to make. You don't have to reinvent something or re-educate people. I mean, there are people here that bring a lot of heritage with them. Thank you. Thank you. That was our, as I said, last maybe addition more than a question. I had a last question for you two. We talked about the fundament of solidarity. Can you maybe shortly, because a flag is hollow, right? And very much based on nationality. And one of our speakers last time said, yeah, you put away that flag. And then what did we exactly do in our solidarity? When we take Ukraine as an example with the flags. And what would be for you an example of a fundamental way of a more impactful solidarity action or not an action, whatever you would like to add to. What's
That's
a
a good
fundament
question.
for our solidarity? Yeah,
That's a good question. I need to think about it a bit.
think about it, because you wrote about it also in your article. It's like
Well, I'm just thinking
questioning
about your words.
solidarity.
I don't know if I agree. If a
Yeah.
flag is a hollow statement, I don't think it's very hollow. I think it's very important. But then we have to put up flags for all people who are subjected to other people, not just this one. You know, I mean, I remember once years ago when I had like this Palestina scarf on my neck, and I was in Denmark, I think, and then my taxi driver, he just teared up. And I'm like, well, are you okay? And he's like, so there's just this token of solidarity. I think it's very important. I don't think these are hollow signs at all. But just to see this one flag when we have all these people.
More in the sense of the flag will go away at a certain point, and then what remains in this freedom of that we can take an action on our solidarity as well. So maybe indeed not hollow. Those were the words that were used last time, but I think it's interesting that you also question that word. But
Where are the other flags then?
Yeah.
Right? I
Yeah.
mean, this flag stands for my teenage children who have to run in school and collect money for Ukraine, which is gorgeous. But then they ask me, what about all the other refugees all the years past? Like, honey, I don't know. I don't know. The school doesn't organize that.
yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think I'm thinking of an interview that I saw on Zwijgen is geen optie. It's a Belgian Flemish program on YouTube with Olivia Rutazigua professor.
So zwijgen is geen optie is silence is no option.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Continue.
She's talking about what happened in Rwanda years and like 25 years ago, and she's saying something like, "But this is not about what we could do, but maybe what the people who have the power to do so could have done." And she's saying something like everyone left when the genocide started, and everyone looked at it from a distance and just looked at it, something like that. So I think what countries could do is to stay, something like that. Yeah.
I think you're describing the feeling of abandonment. I can really relate to that coming from Afghanistan.
Yeah, and with Ukraine, I feel like we're staying. We're still.
We're remaining.
Yeah, something like that.
There is a there is a continuous. It's zichtbaar. I really don't. All of a sudden, I lost.
Visible.
It's visible. Thank you. It's very. It's visible on a long term. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. Lisette, we talked about your art and work, and well, you're gonna show us a little bit of your art and work today as well as an intermezzo before we go to the panel. I think we all need it. These were quite profound subjects. Can I have a very big round of applause for our writer, novelist, who finally came out of the house today to see us. Thank you so much. Lisette?
Hey, I brought someone with me, Orville Breveld. And he's looking at me like, what are we going to do? But what we always do, we talk about a lot of different subjects and topics, just like we just did. But what we always love to do is to improvise a bit. And he's really good at it. So I want you to take us somewhere. I want you to take us to a household. You can start a bit when I'm explaining. So we're going to a household, and we're young, we're children. And something happened in that household. We feel something there. There's something that we don't see, but we feel it. And there's a poem I have, and I always describe it as a room. So you're young, you're growing, you're becoming a bit older and a bit older, and you know all the rooms in your house. You know where everything is, where everyone sleeps, etc. But there's this one room, and you cannot enter it. And you know that you cannot enter it. You never tried, and sometimes it's open, and you just look you just look a bit like, oh, what's going on there, and then when someone sees you, you leave immediately. And that room, it's like everything that happened to everyone is in that room. So take us to that room. Who doesn't speak Dutch? I want to see hands. Okay. For you, I will do an English poem. I might mix it up with Dutch a bit. And do you remember what happened in 1994? And for other people, it will be another year. And for other nations or countries or folks, it might be 2022. But if you play as what happened in 1994, what's inside of that room? I'll say a poem. Memories of my brother. Herinneringen van mijn broer. Elke dag liep hij naar school met het gewicht van dode buren in zijn rugtas. every day. He walked to school with the weight of dead neighbors in his backpack. On his right hand, my sister, who with each birthday becomes as old as the Rwandan genocide. On his left hand, the little girl that wanted to comfort her mother, but did not know she could not comfort Rwandan mothers. Me. Zij begrepen het al. They already understood. Zij begrepen het al. Wat het moederland was geworden en ook wat het was geweest, een paradijs. En dan een rivier van bloed dat uit lijken stroomt. A paradise. And then a river of blood flowing from corpses. Friends, family, familiars. For I only knew this landscape. I only knew this. Dit huisje, boompje, beestje leven. Al waren we toen al de vreemde vruchten in onze fruitmand. We leerden samen het Wilhelmus. Het over koetjes en kalfjes hebben. En dat de appel niet ver van de boom valt. En dat de appel niet ver van de boom valt. We painted our cheeks red, white, and blue. On most days, a bit of orange. En wanneer Nederland de voorselecties van het WK niet haalde, dan deden we net alsof we Vlamingen waren. Wij werden Afro. Wij werden Afro-Europeanen. Laten we naar Matonge Blues gaan. We became Afropeans. So I'll do a small poem to actually answer a question. I don't see. I don't. Oh yeah, there you are. To answer your question on what would I make from that research of traveling through Europe, and I'll just take you to a few places before we go on to the next poem. Sing, this is the way we do. Sing, this is what we do. Singing, this is the Matonge Blues, and this is Gare du Nord. Singing, this is the way we move, and this is the way we move, and this is the way we give, the way we live, the way we love, the way we take, the way we are. This is the Matonge Blues. This is singing. This is Borgeraad, and this is Châteauroux, and this is the Benelux, and this is Belmer Park Theater, and this is the way we do, and this is the way we move. Thank you. Now we're going to a Dutch poem, but I will explain a bit what it will be about. So in the piece that I wrote from the essays of Karin, there's one poem where I talk about the mother, and where I talk about how every story starts within a mother, or with a mother that just grabs you and holds you and screams stuff to you, and something like this and something like that and something like etc., etc., etc. I want you to play that mother for us, the beginning of all stories. And then we go a bit further in the play. And in between the poems, or maybe the poems are the in-betweens, but there's a lot happening. There's a family coming up, and the family is happy, discovering their new place, discovering their new home. And then it happens again, and it's like a loop of discovering a new place, and every time the new place becomes uglier maybe, or harder. And first we talk about how every story starts with the mother, but then at some point we talk about how a mother dies, and how a mother dies maybe from the inside, and maybe she's still alive, but somewhere a mother dies. And then I say something like, not somewhere, it's not that a mother dies somewhere, but everywhere mothers are dying. Ergens sterft de moeder. Overal sterven moeders uit. Ergens sterft een moedertaal. Ergens sterft een moederland, en ergens sterft een moeder binnenshuis. Sterven al haar kamers uit. En ergens in haar leven, of ergens in jouw leven, zie je haar. Ergens is zij ook een vrouw, een tot vrouw gemaakt mens. Soms zie je haar. En soms zie je haar, binnenin je leeft een vreemde in het huis. Binnenin je zit ergens nog een uitgestorven taal. Binnenin je zit ergens nog het Nederlands-Indië, zit ergens nog Kigali, zit ergens nog een uitgestorven taal. Maar ergens komt een vader thuis. Dit is de soms van het leven. Soms vinden twee mensen elkaar allebei heel erg leuk. Soms blijft een meisje leven. Meisje, ik weet het niet, Simbizi. Meisje, wat doe je hier, Simbizi? Maar meisje, met wie was je hier? Ik weet het niet, Simbizi. Maar meisje, waar woon je dan, Simbizi? Dan redt de man het meisje. Dezelfde man dan redt de man het meisje. Dezelfde man die eerder van dit meisje een wees had gemaakt. Dezelfde soldaat die eerder van het meisje een wees had gemaakt. Dezelfde soldaat, dan redt de man het meisje. Dan redt de soldaat het meisje. Dezelfde soldaat die eerder haar ouders had doodgeknuppeld. We look our neighbors in the eyes. You killed my brother now. Now be my brother. Maar ergens komt een vader thuis. En ergens is de buurman nieuw. En ergens is de buurman dezelfde persoon die je jongere zus en oudere broer in de wc heeft doorgespoeld. We look our neighbor in the eye, you killed my brother, now be my brother. If that's the life we live now, that's the life that lives us. Now that's the life that lives us. En ergens wordt het vergeten. We houden 1 minuutje stilte om het allemaal te vergeten. Ergens wordt verzwegen, verbannen. Ergens wordt verdrongen. Ergens wordt vergeten. Niet vergeven, vergeten. Hoe een vrouw ademloos achterbleef met een stok tussen haar benen, vergeten. Hoe blauw bloed door het dorp heen werd gereden met steeds een ledemaat minder. Steeds een ledemaat minder, maar nog steeds in leven vergeten. Dat het in mijn land allemaal ging om de lengte van onze nekken en onze neuzen. Vergeten. Ergens wordt het vergeten. Niet vergeven. En ergens worden er actiefilms van gemaakt. Ergens wordt het leed geromantiseerd, niet hier. Maar ergens wil ik het weten. Ergens wil ik het weten. Die kamer, ergens wil ik het weten. Isn't that sweet, brother? Want ergens sterft een moederland en ergens sterft een moedertaal en ergens komt een vader thuis, maar nergens wordt vergeten, nergens wordt vergeten. Fast forward a quarter of a lifetime, and we're in our country. We're in Rwanda, and we're ignoring everything that has happened and that still lays in everybody's eyes and everybody's mind, and we're just enjoying the sweetness of it, the sweetness of maybe being home. Sweet Rwanda, on the days I bleed. Sweet Rwanda, always on the lead. Sweet Rwanda, every single time. Sweet Rwanda, I have missed you so much, so much. Sweet Rwanda, always make me weep. Sweet Rwanda, on the day Sweet Rwanda, I have missed you so much, so much. Sweet Rwanda, on the days I bleed. Sweet Rwanda, on the days I leave. And sweet Rwanda, on the days I leave.
An extra thank you for Orfiel Breveld, who's a marketer at Royal Concertgebouw, musician, podcast, and doku, who I asked, how should I introduce you? And he said, just musician. But I think it's amazing that you do all these things. And I forgot to introduce you at all at the end before the performance. So an extra round of applause for you, because it added an amazing ambiance to the whole performance. Thank you so much. Wow, I need to go back to leading a conversation after that. Catching my breath. Yes, now we come to the panel part. Together with Lydia Zelovic, can I ask you to come here, who's a documentary maker? Yes, a little applause for you. Josien Pietersen, founder of Framer Framed, and Frederik Biemans, curator, program maker, and impact producer, previously working at Humanity House. Thank you so much. Yes. So, today, you're all, it's sinking in, right? Yeah. War and conflict. That's the topic that also brought us here, and how do we relate to that within the art and culture sector in Amsterdam? All three of you do work within this topic as well, or are related to this topic. And can you maybe share within your own words, Lydia, I'm going to start with you, what your role is in that conversation of war and conflict, and how you relate to this topic?
I was really enjoying the first part. It made me, it got me thinking on the same lines that I was thinking before. It was interesting when what Karen said is like you take the space is given to you, and because I was, I was one of those white refugees that came almost 30 years ago, and I didn't, when you're in refugee camp and you kind of, I think I realized even then, but later I really realized that there is elite even among the refugees, and I was elite. I was the white refugee in the camps, and it was very interesting because I come from a very white world. I didn't come across many. There was not many people take refuge to Balkans for obvious reasons. So it was very obvious, and as the time went by, I was even more. It was very obvious that it was happening even in the 90s. Even though in the 90s, Netherlands was a very different place than it is now. But what Karen said, there was always given a space to me, I think. But it was always a space for refugees, and there was never a space that I wanted to take. First, it was like, oh, they're gonna make a film about me, or they were gonna. I was really like, but no. If anyone's gonna make a film about me, it's gonna be me. It's like, you don't. And it was very interesting, that space that was, because later Lisette was also saying something like, but what? I think she was like, what about that space? And now, 29 years later, I really think that is the problem, that there is a space given to you, and that space is, there is the oldest, the saying of the slaves, not that I compare us to the slaves, but there was the saying that you can't be given the freedom, you have to fight for the freedom, and if you're given the freedom, it can be taken away from you as well, so it's not yours. And there is something with that space as well. Of course you have to be, but I think if you're given the space, it's someone else decides about that space. What I think it needs to be changed, the whole concept. In
your ownership is what you're talking about.
It's not your space. It's given to you, and then it's somehow someone else decides what happens within that space. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that the whole narration has to be changed around it. It's not what you can do for me, but actually what can I do for you? I really believe that the refugees there is a chance that people, the immigrants generally, are really, like, in many ways, creme de la creme of society, because these are the people that have differently filtered glasses that look differently.
The creme de la creme, you mean in what they have to offer?
It's what they have to offer.
Okay.
So as soon as you ask, if you say, what can we do for you, you actually make that this is the existing narrative, is that you are someone who needs to be helped, even though I think that we are actually, and definitely now, in where Netherlands is at the moment, that we are the people who can do something for Netherlands, and that we really can change, we really can make it better, because it's our home.
Yeah.
It's also, and yet I see it with the different glasses.
And you do work on this topic as
Yeah.
well, because I said, how do you relate to this topic? Next to the fact that you also carry it, as you said, within your identity and so many more things. And you also made a movie. You said, I don't want someone to make a movie about me.
Yeah.
You made a documentary about this part. We will come to that later. But thank you for your addition to the last conversation that we just also had. Josien, you're the founder and director of Framer Framed. In your capacity as well, the director of Framer Framed, and also owning one of those spaces that we keep talking about, how do you relate to this topic of war and conflict and solidarity and giving space to people related to that?
It's quite a big question, of course, because then I have to tell a lot about the things that we do. But I think I totally agree about supporting the quote of Karin before, that you have to take the space that is offered to you. I think you could very easily actually project that on institutions. We, as an individual, that is an option, but I think we as institutions should also take the space that is offered to us, because I see that there, on the one hand, there is really a lot of space that you can take as an organization to do things and to speak out. We as program exhibitions, so, and always with guest curators, and a lot of the exhibitions that we program are on war and conflict. So that is one of the things that we do. On the other hand, and to give an example, we have had exhibitions on Colombia, or we and decades of conflict in Colombia, and people that artists that reflect on that. Srebrenica. We had also a very important part of it is also self-representation, so that curators and artists come themselves from the area. Yeah. And we invite also a lot of people to talk about it. So our context program is very, it's actually 50 to 100 programs a year. So we have actually weekly programs. We have an open door for people that want to respond to the exhibition, want to program something. We do education projects, but on the other hand, we also, and I don't know if I can say that now anymore, but we create space.
Of course you can.
For a lot of communities to come on the long term.
How
in
does
the
that
space.
conversation evolve then to when it turns into that action of creating that space? And having this diversity of perspectives of all these areas that you just named that is within your exhibition, because you are perceived in Amsterdam as one of the best practices of how that's an open space, as you just described.
We realized that on the one hand, of course, we did our exhibition program was much on the topics that also Karin referred to, so the migration, colonization, identity topics, but we thought it would be also very logical to provide more space for communities themselves to claim the space, and we started with that in actually during the lockdown more than 2 years ago, when a group people came up to us from IPSI, from Intercultural Psychiatry Group, and they told us that part of their group was actually now excluded from mental health care because of the cuts in healthcare, and the group could only stay together outside of the framework in a way. So then we offered the space to them, and they could weekly meet have art therapy in Framer Framed, and we could also provide that space when we had to close as a presentatieinstelling, as a presentation organization.
Yeah.
Because we went to the municipality and said, okay, can we temporarily change the destination of our space when we have to be we have to close as an art space? Why can not we use the space for
And was
other
it
means?
successful?
And that in the first place, it was difficult because civil servants were in the first moment saying that, yeah, obviously you're an art space, we cannot change that. And then then we asked politicians to decide on that, and still accepted it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and also the same was
It is actually what we just were touching upon is the law says one thing, but then we can take that freedom and luxury that we have also, especially in Amsterdam and in this art and culture sector, to do something else than what the law just provides us. So also thank you for this.
Yeah, and I will keep it short, but a group of We Saw Reality, which is a group of people that were experiencing also during the lockdown that the daycare for people without papers. Of course, they have papers, but not the papers to stay in the Netherlands. They could actually not stay anywhere anymore because the daycare was closed. Like commercial spaces were not accessible anymore, and the Corona Pass was, of course, also not available for them. So then we also could provide a space for them to stay.
Do you mean people who were undocumented?
Yeah.
Okay. And you provided a space for them to stay and also to reside, to be, or
not to sleep, but to stay during the day
and
work on their artistic program, which I do in Framer Framed still.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that very clear example. We also have Frederic here, of course. So can you tell in your own words in what capacity within the subjects you're here and how you got confronted with war and conflict in your work?
I'm here in the capacity of a good mensch, a naive good mensch, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But I'm learning.
Yeah.
It's like I'm in an AA meeting, like, I'm sorry, I'm a good mensch, but I'm learning. But anyway, so I'm confronted with these topics mainly. I'm confronted obviously with peace. So that's my reality, has been all my life. And through the work that I've been doing in Humanity House and elsewhere in Bosnia or...
because you started Criterion in Bosnia as an art and culture institution, or can you...
Yeah, based on the idea of Criterion here in Amsterdam, which is a post-war organization totally run by students. We figured it would be fun or good or nice to do the same thing in Sarajevo after the war there. But this is also what I mean with the let me circle back.
Yeah.
Because I believe that we can eventually we need to learn. We need to learn how to be able to empathize with people who have been through war and conflict. And I believe that we can only do so by listening, meeting, showing, learning, having truly uncomfortable conversations with people who have actually gone through those issues, because only through all those phases, I think we can learn how to provide proper space. If you are in the position, and unfortunately sometimes you are in the position that you can give away space, then at least you need to know how, to whom you should give it or how you should give it. And I think, well, of course, we met in Humanity House.
Yeah, because we talked about cultural heritage right before this conversation as well. And we met in Humanity House. Humanity House was a museum that was about refugees and also an experience museum, you say in English, and how this slogan that now language-wise I have a huge problem with was literally crawl in the skin of a refugee and know how it is to be one or something in English. So now, I mean, I'm talking about this emancipation in language also that we had to go through, right? And I was an intern, and I was the only one with a refugee background in that department that we were sitting. And something didn't feel right for me. And we had many conversations, and I even had a conversation with the director, and I said, but I'm a refugee millennial, out of the blue, because I said I'm a millennial, like any other Dutch millennial, but I have this extra dimension, and that is that I have this refugee dimension, and that's where I realized what all of that brings with it. And I said, there are some certain programs and subjects that you cannot organize within this space. It's up to me and my generation to do that. And I remember you being very overloaded with work, because that's the art and culture sector, like continuously having to do fondsaanvragen and to do all kinds of stuff and having to maintain those relationships. There are partners, etc. And that at a certain point you said, you know what, hang on to that thought. And then you came back and you said, I want you to organize a program about this feeling you're having. And then we did, and there was this entire program series full of storytelling of all kinds of refugee millennial from Iraq, Afghanistan, Rwanda, all kinds of places, especially also millennials that came here as children in the 90s. But there was this moment where you, even when you didn't have the time, you created the space and said, create this cultural heritage. It's yours, it's not ours, but you have to tell it. And how do you see that translating now to today, how we are creating, because now you're a curator still and a program maker, to broaden that cultural heritage we talked about?
Well, I think this is about mapping necessities. If you don't, not all the necessities are your necessities. So you need to figure out whose necessity do we want to translate in our organization or in our institute. And I think at Humanity House, we've taken a long time to not only provide space on a stage, but also backstage. And that's something that we had to go through. But also, not everybody backstage has the same necessity or has the same urge to tell a certain story. So that's also something that you continuously need to figure out. Like, what is the necessity? Who is actually able to properly map that necessity? And how am I going to create the time and money to do so? Because that's always eventually the question. You need to find somebody, pay somebody, and take a breath before you actually say, like, okay, so this is what we're going to put on stage, or this is what I'm going to put in my museum. So it's not. So I think it's and that's what basically happened. And it's not just because you were a refugee millennial, but also you had a damn good idea. And I'm head of programs, and you recognize a good idea if it's there, right? So it's also on the merits of your creativity and your starting professionality that I figured, like, you know, I can trust this woman, to actually go and do this. And that's also, I mean, it's a continuous search in these kind of...
Yes, and we also get, I think, confronted with, there's also a point in organization where you don't only create space, you give away your space.
Yeah.
Whereas I became programmer there instead of someone else working there at a certain point, which shifted things as well. And where I mean,
there's one more person I want to. Throughout my career, I've been doing different stuff, and I've also worked in Bangladesh a lot with photographer Shahidul Alam.
Yeah.
And he once told me, because I was sent also like this big bag of money from the Dutch government, and now we're going to help his organization to professionalize. I was 25, whatever. And he pointed out in one of his books, his photography books, that there's this quote on the back that he usually says. He says, like, I love that you offer your helping hand, but please don't stand in my sun. And I thought that was such a big lesson also for me to learn. And that's why I'm saying I think it's a constant learning and having uncomfortable conversations to be able to kind of like empathize with somebody else, but never appropriate somebody's sorrow or injustice, because it's not mine. Like I said, I'm grown up in peace. So I don't know. I don't even actually know what peace is, because is peace something that happens after war, or is it what we are living now? I don't even know that question myself, and it's my background. So so it's a lifelong learning on my
learning
opinion.
curve. Yeah. Just doing a round look in the audience whether there's any question or remark coming. Or else I will go to you, Lydia, because we mentioned your document, which is interesting because I talked about refugee millennials. It started with me researching my inner conflict as being originating from a conflict area, and how you are continuously also within yourself in war because. Well, anyway, for me, it was also the privilege with my red-blooded passport that I have here, and then I still have to relate to this war happening there that I'm not a part of, yet I am. And your documentary is called My Own Private War. And there's a trailer. We're going to watch the trailer, and then we're going to talk about that a little bit.
One day, on our way to school, my son asked me, "Mama, if there were dinosaurs in a time of war, would they have eaten good people as well as bad people?" My love, didn't we agree there is no such a thing as good people and bad people?
Uzalud se nadaš da ćeš ostati, on sad tek vidi.
I zašto onda da idem kod nekoga tamo da mi on govori o svojoj istini?
Samo zato što će to biti da čuješ nešto što do sad nisi čuo.
Pa pobjednik istoriju piše i on napiše sve najcrnije.
Ali vidiš ti, dobro znam, ali vidiš, ko piše, sad ćete vi pisati novu istoriju.
Ne mogu ja sada biti svetac, neutralan, a tamo se stvarno ponižava srpski narod.
Ja sam već mislila da možeš ti biti svetac, neutralan.
Bih da samo čujem tamo da oći.
I on isto tako kaže, da hoće samo...
Lišće već opalo je.
Pa slijepo, reci mi samo nešto da radiš.
Tačno prava riječ, ich bin operal verfremd. Ja mislim da sam teo sad fino to, sad ja...
Ma sad će sve da bude super.
Znaš šta je mislim?
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you.
A moment of shameless plug. Where can we watch this, and when was this aired, and when will it be aired?
It's an uitzending gemist. It's on a Dutch tweedoc program.
Yeah, and it's a 3-part series, or
it's a second part of a 3-part. The first one is called My Friends. It's about my son was born. I'm getting married. And I'm trying to make for one day war not happen. So I just try to organize my friends to come for my wedding, friends that actually because of the war are not in contact anymore. And I try for one day that we all pretend that it wasn't, that there was no war. And then this is the second part, and now the third part is called Home Abroad. It's about everything we're discussing here. And my son, who is now 16 and who feels that he's Bosnian, and that I was really surprised he's born and raised here, and I'm just trying to figure, what does it mean for you? What do you know? So, and that's the discovery and understanding what means to be home abroad.
It's beautiful. Thank you. I'm very spot on everything that we're, of course, talking about. Can you tell us, sharing these layers, I mean, a documentary is an ideal form of sharing all these layers and this stories about identity that we just talked about, because you can take your time in a documentary to dismantle all these layers. But we also, of course, have quicker art than documentary. We're, as I said again, in the art and culture. So why is it more important now than ever to dismantle these layers, as you did in your documentary, to introduce people what it means to come from war, and why war and conflict is also very relevant for us here today in the Netherlands?
I think that only if you dismantle it and if you understand what's going on, is that you can really understand in what danger we are. So you don't keep on reacting, but being active. And I think Netherlands is in a very tricky position now. I mean, everywhere in Europe and in the world is a very transitory, tense times. And now more than ever, it's really important to see where the polarization in Netherlands is so huge that we know.
I think it's even Europe-wide. We can state, yeah.
Of course. Somehow Netherlands is my home, and I'm
Yeah.
busy. And I actually do believe that Netherlands, if it's when I finish the film, that when you focus very small, when you go on micro level, you're gonna have a big chance to go. That you actually go worldwide because it's happening all over the place. But so if I focus on on Netherlands and on what's going on in Netherlands, it will be very well understood all over Europe for sure. So it's really, that actually goes to the question that Frederic just asked, what is peace? That's actually I think it's a very important thing.
Yeah, if we speak of what conflict is, we also have to speak of what peace looks like.
But it's very important actually, because that when you start questioning what a peace is, you are in a tricky position. It's actually only people in war wonder about peace. So it's actually the first time that I asked them. So it's actually the fact that you ask that. It's something that is coming closer to us, that we actually wondering, really, what is peace? So it's something very important to dismantle up to the tiniest details, to know where we live and what it means, what we have, and what is the danger. Because now something gentleman there said is what about our left bubble? Yes, indeed. Before we all entered here, we agreed on everything before we entered this. So we're talking to each other, we're preaching for our own church, and how to reach outside, and that's really what's important. We don't have to be right. We just have to try to change something. And I think we actually don't question it. We just actually want to be right. And it's very, very dangerous. And if you've been through the war, as I have been, you know what a slippery slope that is. It goes like this, wrong. And yeah, it's, I think, that's why I think I didn't mean when I said the creme de la creme of society, I meant at this point where it's so tense. I really don't want to, I don't believe it either, that the line of a good and bad runs among the nation borders or around genders on any level, that anyone, but it actually, we all have good and bad in us, that we all have that inside of us. And as much as Dutch have to be empathetic to the refugees, not maybe when they just arrive, but people like me for sure, and people when you
because that's where the cultural heritage that we talk about is.
Yeah.
We're part of the Netherlands now. We're part of this collective.
But we also have to be empathetic to where we are and what's going on. So it's really,
it's a relationship. It's not
take responsibility as well, where it goes.
And speaking of mapping necessities, you also have an organization called On File. Can you, in your own words, explain that it's for documentary makers or filmmakers?
It's actually for journalists. On File is an organization that helps refugees, former refugees, or the funny thing is about being refugee is really something we don't like to be described, but that's what we are. You know, they say once a refugee, always a refugee. So it's a tricky thing to shake off.
Hold on that thought, because you touched upon something very interesting that I do want to come back on. Because this is a discussion we had at Refugee Millennials as well, is that there's also differences in privileges in the midst of the refugee identity. And you said being a white refugee is really something different. And I noticed talking to white refugees coming from former Yugoslavia or from specific areas in Europe, they don't identify themselves as refugees as often as brown or black people do. Where do you think that uncomfortableness comes from?
No, but it's
or does it have to do with how society has perceived them, and they don't have to embrace that identity as much?
It's the thing is we were also European refugees, so it was very, I think it really had to do with the way we don't I'm always surprised when I'm on the street and people start speaking English to me, even though I'm always surprised. How do they see I'm not Dutch? And I know I'm not. And I just somehow was like, how do they know? It's just I really want to be, I'm always, and that is something that so it's actually when you don't get reminded. I get reminded and I'm surprised, and you don't get reminded. So it's actually, if you don't constantly get reminded of you being refugee, you forget about it. And it's great to forget from time to time. And then it becomes like religion, it becomes something personal. It's my thing.
Yeah.
I am a refugee. Don't take it away from me. It's my thing.
Mm-hmm.
But don't call me one,
Yeah.
because then it's not my thing
It's
anymore.
complex.
So it's a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
complex relationship.
So back to Anfile, it's someone with a refugee background or current
So
newcomers.
yes, we try to help to create a space, to create a home for people with a refugee background who are journalists to have a voice here, because we really believe that the people with a refugee background really have something to say, that they really look at the world and look at the Netherlands with different eyes. And it's necessary for them, but it's very, very necessary for Netherlands. It's a very tricky, because now we see in the last couple of years, the situation is changing, and you see that there is really more space. But you see, it's really just theoretical. And that's why this space about don't create a space. We have to create a narrative in which it's acceptable. That, we would go with a on file, we'll go to NOS, for example, and they would say, but we really can't. We really, really can't have anyone with an accent present news. Like, it's very funny, because it's actually expectation has to do with what's expected. You can just, it's because we're so used to expect that. So we can slowly change that, because there's nothing wrong with someone.
Because that's also
with
the
an accent.
Netherlands.
Because
there are a
also
lot of
Netherlands.
people with accents. It's
And
still
it's
Dutch.
very interesting. And I think it's the people with an accent with that accent comes different knowledge. And it's if we manage to change that picture of that people with an accent, they're not stupid, but they just have different knowledge. The knowledge really has a very important, very high price. So
Yeah.
Is that it's somehow if we manage to, so we need to change context instead of creating space. Nothing against the space, absolutely amazing, and I love Frame of Frame. I really love it, and I go regularly, and it's amazing. I just think it's on a long term that our goal is not has to be long-term solution, because I have a feeling if you create space, it's something short thing, and it's what the Karen was saying. We're here to stay, that kind of thing. It's not. Oh no, listen, it's not. It's not a temporary thing. It's happening. It's that thing. That's it.
Yeah.
This is what it is. This is the world now.
And we also have Amsterdam Storytelling Center here, the founder, Arjen, over there, that I had very important conversations about this as well, because storytelling is a very big part of our art and culture scene now as well. And we continuously told about these stories that bind us. Arjen, can you tell us how you collect these stories and what and recognize these necessities and the sensitivities that come with that you need to have the right kind of sensitivity to do those stories justice and empower the people you're asking, as we talked about?
It starts with listening. I think often we make the mistake that we think, okay, this person, either with a refugee background or with any background, wants to share this story, and then we facilitate it. Yeah. Not accusing, but I see that happening a lot. I think we first have to listen and go into communities, and not as the organization, just as an equal person. Just listen, just walk with people, just eat with people, just be with people. And then you will find out what stories they really feel they wanna share. And sometimes, and I told you today, recently I worked with someone who came from Syria, and he told me the entire story. And we were working on a sort of performance, a presentation.
Entire story of his refugee background.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, this story is gold. But we worked towards a presentation, and this was not the story he wanted to present. It's fine. Then he presents another. I am just listening to him and facilitating what he, in this case it was he, wants to share. And I think that there should be more space for listening to all the stories. I heard some beautiful things about stories. Stories are very important. Stories create our identities. We constantly have to question the stories that create our identity. Everybody, I think. And by listening, I think we come way further.
Thank you. And we also shortly, we talked about this, and I will round up then this conversation, and I would like to have your input in this as well, because, and also you, Frederik, because you worked with this question a lot too, is we also have to do a lot of, as I said, what's the English word? I forgot it. The funding system that we have, aanvragen, requests, to have the fundings and the means to also, I mean, we talk about creating, but we need to have the means to do so. In this system, how much flexibility is there in the art and culture sector? Because Amsterdam Storytelling Center also has to work a lot with fundings as well. Is how do we create this flexibility of saying, okay, we will give 20% of our organization to this part of society?
Yes, well, the thing is certainly with structurally subsidized organizations, we have to make a 4-year plan, and we don't know what's happening in these 4 years. So it would be very good if we would say, if the funds would say, okay, 20% of this is flexible space to react on what is coming. Because when now someone comes to me with a story, I first have to think, in which plan it fits, in which budget, etc. And of course we make the space, and I know other organizations also make the space, but I think funders, donors can also support that by saying, hey, you have some flexibility to react, etc. It would make it even easier. Again, it doesn't stop us from doing such things.
Good mensch. You said that this was one of the challenges, but that you have to,
What, the whole funding?
Yeah.
Where do we start? I mean, really. I mean, yeah, we all need the money, and it's. But I don't know how you are going to report on the fact that you gave your space away for people to actually stay during the day. Obviously, also making art, but. Maybe also just being there without doing any artsy stuff. So, I mean, the funding system is just like any other system that we are constantly complying to. Should we start mapping our necessities outside the system that is constantly deciding what is possible and what is not?
Let me put it differently. If we were able to think,
just on a roll.
Sorry.
No, I'm kidding.
If you had the liberty outside, because you're talking about the system. I mean, of course, the capitalistic neoliberal system creates a lot of things that we get stuck in. But if you could be radical and think about how does this look like, this 20%, because I'm trying to get to the 3rd episode, and where we maybe can do partnerships in this city and create this 20% in several organizations and come with a radical
20%
movement.
come from?
I have no idea. Maybe 15, maybe
I'm just
25. I'm just saying.
If maybe there's already some.
No. It's. I mean, it's a casus, right? We're trying to make it concrete, because it also is frustrating for people that we are talking about, the ex-refugees or whatever, that it doesn't become concrete. We need to put it into action. And if we could be radical and we say, this is where we live in peace. We have the art and culture sector in Amsterdam. Amsterdam is a progressive city. How does this radical movement look like where we are?
I truly believe that the Amsterdam Arts, not every institute has to join, but I think altogether you are able to make a very strong voice in society to try and start a different conversation, to face difficult conversations, to kind of like radicalize your solidarity in some way. And I don't know yet in what way, because I'm also stuck in a system, and it's difficult on my own, or maybe with a beer with a friend in the pub, to decide like how really different would it look, what really different would it look like. But that's what I would really. I think Amsterdam is supposed to be a city where you do not necessarily listen to our central government. So let's get together and with all the people that feel like, okay, we need to radicalize our solidarity and see how can we together do this. And you have all these square meters in the city, and it's amazing, because square meters in Amsterdam, I mean, my goodness, it's worth so much. And what do you do with it? How do you do it? And if it's 20%, or maybe it's 100%, and then we take back 20% or whatever. But I mean, let's let's have a tough conversation, and with those people who are actually able to map the proper necessities in this
And we
in
will do
this
that
way.
in the third episode, because we're gonna have a dinner.
Yeah.
And
I would
talk to
like
those
to add
people.
something
And,
to it, because
yeah,
I
of
think
course.
also that also for this counts the same thing. I would say, like, take the space, like, for 2 years, off and on, we had to close as a presentatiestelling, which is a space that you run for artists and for an audience. So, and if you have to close your doors and you redefine this assignment and say, okay, so we have to now think of a new plan, how we can give assignments to artists, and we have to think how we are doing work for an audience. Now, in the Molenwijk, we have a sort of dependance and also a venue. And there we decided to start a food bank, because regular food banks were not open for the people that were fired suddenly. A lot of people in the Molenwijk experienced that suddenly, without work, they could not very easily buy food anymore. So together with the buurtvereniging, we opened a space as a food bank, and we ran that for 9 months. Otherwise, we should have been closed. So, why not redefine your
creative
space?
thinking within the
and
creative sector. Yeah.
and then finally, the Stadsdeel also created the new space where the food bank could stay, now sort of semi-permanently, because the food banks that are already there. So the formal structure is that you also have to show that you're already without work for a longer time. Now, people that were suddenly without work because they have flex jobs, could not show these kind of papers and had
that they're poor enough.
Yeah. So the same thing, of course, for the communities that needed a space. We could not be an art space in the regular sense. So why not open a space for other people? Provide possibilities for commissioned works. We work together with the Amsterdam Museum to give artists assignments also for online exhibitions. We did a lot of specific projects in which we gave artists assignments.
Yeah.
So I think you can also define very when you're changing suddenly your role, or you have to change your role, then you can also redefine.
Yeah,
this
so it's not static.
It's
within
absolutely
that
not static.
within that
And
system that we're talking about. You don't take the static position, but you become dynamic. So you adjust in order to be able to provide.
And I
in
think
that need.
the funders, are also open for that. Especially in a time in which everybody has to improvise.
Yeah.
And I think for us it is very important to think about here and there. I think also Egbert mentioned it, the discussion before, that we are in Amsterdam, a city with 180 different nationalities, but also we have a colonial history as the Netherlands. We're very intertwined with all kind of other histories, and we're
creating new history as well.
Exactly,
as
and we have this is the kind of stories that we want to tell also in Framer Framed, and not only the historical perspective, which is actually very important to tell new stories about history, but also contemporary stories about here and there.
Thank you.
It's not so divided.
Yeah, thank you. I am really looking forward to that, Amsterdam, and that form of art and culture sector. And as I said, next time we will be having dinner. Instead of talking about these necessities, we hopefully talk to the people who have these necessities and connect with a network that might need these spaces. Thank you very much. Can I have a round of applause for the panel? The time went so fast. I am looking at the organization because there was a surprise at the end, and I'm seeing someone writing really hard for a wrap-up, poetic wrap-up, but I don't know if we're allowed to time-wise. I think so. Yes. take the stage because Lisetta is going to finalize this evening because she's been writing, and this was a surprise actually, to instead of continuously using all kinds of definitions and words, to have a poetic and full of art ending. Thank you, Lisetta. Take the stage.
Thank you. And also thank you to all the speakers. Thank you so much for the words I've received. And I hope to give it back to all of you. Orville. As I said before, we love a bit of improvisation. I want you to play this feeling of what I saw in the trailer of your documentary. This sentence, we have become strangers everywhere. Mm. And the title is When War Looks Like You. When war looks like you. Only people like us wonder about peace. Speaking of solidarity, zwijgen is geen optie. Question, who are we tonight? Where does us start? She asks. Where slaughter is, it destroys. It destroys us. Only where victims look so similar, migrants become people again. These questions dig into the source, asking where are we from, carving out, no crafting out our identity. Where do we belong? These questions, these are the questions of the human heart. Coming out of Sahar, speaking English when you witness me, I will not forget I'm not this land. The series started with painful hope. We comb our hair with our fingertips. We find our ways even when we do not seem to be. We belong anyways. We belong anyways. We belong anyways. We behave. We belong anyways. We behave anywhere. Where anger stems from love, my mother says, and stories of trauma and replacement are not being called golden anymore. I realize that fasting is a privilege. Hearing from an elite amongst the refugees, freedom can't be given. It can only be taken. Here I am. Here I take the space you offer me. Here I am, New Europe. New Europe will tell a story of its own. Orville, can you tell a story of your own? As he tells a story of his own. And he tells a story of his own. And he tells a story of his own. As he tells a story of his own. Until yesterday, war looked like us. It used to look like us. It was all that looked like us. Orville, I offer you this space to tell a story of your own. Recite a title that is yours. Peace has been all my life, she says. Let me circle back. I take my bike and cycle through my city, my history, my humanity, my heritage. Let me cycle back tonight. I cycle back and circle back. My city, my history, my humanity, my heritage. Full circle, transmission, Karen, she calls herself the optimist, all journalist in rehab. Tonight, seeking for new vocabulary, multiple necessities, refugee millennials, peace may be naive. Life eats good people and better ones. You're not a good cause, constantly causing uncomfortability by being you are the merits of your creativity, she says. As she trusts you, girl, woman, other, life eats bad people and better ones. Peace used to look like us, family too. If that's the life that lives us now, we have become strangers anywhere.